Hello everyone, my name is Ryan, and in this lesson I'll be teaching you how to set the font. And we do this by using a CSS property known as font-family. So I'm going to take you to W3 Schools again, to the CSS reference, and specifically looking under fonts, and then font-family. So the font family is used to specify the font, and it's generally advisable to specify multiple fonts with a comma in between each one. The reason for this is that if the person's browser does not have this font, then it will move on to the next font, and if that computer doesn't have that font, it will move on to the next font. So it's good practice to use at least 3 fonts so that you can have similar fonts in case the font that you really want to give to the person is not available on their system. If a font contains a space, it should be enclosed in double quotation marks. Otherwise, if it's a single word, it does not need the double quotation marks. And then lastly, there is also the concept of a generic family. A generic family is kind of like a category of fonts. And there are 5 main categories of fonts. Those are serif, sans serif, cursive, fantasy, and monospace. So your serif fonts are the ones that contain the strange edges, just like Times New Roman. In fact, if we go to the CSS tutorial and we go to the section on fonts, you can actually get a nice illustration of what a serif is. So if you look at this letter F, you'll notice the little red edges are actually what we call serifs. A sans serif font is the ones without the little edges. So sans means without in Latin. So sans serif is generally your typical Arial font or Verdana font, and your serif font is typically your Times New Roman font. And then we also have the monospace, which means that all the characters have exactly the same width as one another. And then we also have the fantasy and cursive generic font families. And so your fantasy would be kind of like cursive writing, and your cursive would be things like Comic Sans. Okay, so let us experiment a little bit with this. Where would you use a generic family? Normally as the last font in the list of the available fonts, because then if your browser doesn't have Times New Roman or Georgia, it will pick one from that category of fonts on your machine. So you're sure to have at least one font within the serif category on your machine. Okay, so the Emmets plugin has a nice way of choosing these fonts for you. So if we go into our code editor, and I'm going to work on a empty CSS file. So I've got a document with just a heading and 3 paragraphs, and I've linked it to a CSS file called font-family.css. And within that CSS file, I'm now going to create some rules for the font family, specifically the heading. And you can just go FF tab, and it fills it out automatically. That's an Emmets shortcut. You can go one step further and say FF:A, and that will be for Arial. And you'll notice that it puts in Arial, it puts in alternative to Arial, which is similar to Arial, puts in even another alternative to Arial, and as a fourth final option, it puts in a category of fonts known as sans serif. So you don't need all of these. This is a bit of an overkill. If you wanted, you could take out Helvetica and just have Arial, Helvetica New, and then sans serif. Then another thing we can do with font family, well, let's just maybe see what this does first. Notice how the font has changed. Another thing we could do with font family is we could apply it to the paragraph. For the paragraph, I'm just going to do something a little different. I'll make it a Verdana, And there you can see Verdana font has now been applied to the paragraphs with an alternative Geneva font, and then an alternative kind of generic category of fonts, sans serif. So another idea with fonts is to use something called a Google font. So Google has a very nice free service, google.com/fonts. And this is a service provided by Google where you can actually pick a online font. The advantage of these fonts is that it works on everyone's computer because it's actually downloading the font from Google. The disadvantage of these fonts is there is a slight delay while you wait for these fonts to download. But many modern websites today are using Google fonts because they are such nice fonts. So let's pick a font that we like. I like this font over here called Open Sans Condensed. So I'm just going to go and click plus to add it to my shopping cart. And then in my shopping cart, I'm going to go and choose the embed option. And that gives me a link tag which I need to put into my document. So I'm going to copy that and switch back to brackets. And into the HTML file, I'm going to add the link tag for the Google font. Mine's just wrapping it over to the next line. And notice that I put the Google font code before I put my own custom CSS code. And that is because I want to use the Google font now within my own custom CSS code. So if we go back here, the next step is that we need to copy the font family and put that into our own CSS file. So I switch back to my CSS file, and I'm going to now change the font family to rather use the Google font called Open Sans Condensed. And notice that the Google font also includes an alternative generic category in case that one is not available. Okay, so now if we switch back, notice that the body text has changed. It looks like quite a decent font. I might just want to make it a little bit bigger. To increase the size of the font, you can set the font size, not the font style, the font size. If an abbreviation doesn't work for you in Emmet, just add one additional character, and that should work. Font size. That's font style. Okay, so the shortcut we would need to look up, I guess, under Emmet and look at the cheat sheet under the documentation. Let's go to documentation, and then we'll go to the cheat sheet, and then we will look for font size. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick search for that. Alright, so it's FZ. Okay, so switching back to the code, I'm going to do FZ tab, and then I'm going to put in the font size of, let's say, about 12 pixels. That's a bit small. 16, by the way, is the default font size, so if you like that, you can keep it at that or even make it a bit bigger. So refresh, and that looks quite decent. So that brings us to the end of the lesson on working with font family.